Oh.
The Honourable Annette King.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'm going to pick up on the bits that the Chair of the Health Select Committee left out of our report. I have to say, however, in starting my contribution, that we have a very fair Chair of the Health Select Committee, and it's a committee that I very much enjoy working with. And to show what generous people we are, the Minister will know that we congratulated him on becoming the Minister and on the constructive way he'd worked with the Select Committee. I know, of course, that he'd rather been the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but that's another matter. I did raise with him at the very beginning of my contribution my disappointment in the slowness of responding to official information requests and for answering written questions. That, in fact, the Tony Ryle's school of thought had continued under the new minister, and I was very disappointed because I was expecting much more. And the minister said he wanted the best possible result, but I have to tell you, Minister, it's slower than it was when you were before the Select Committee. So can I ask you to go back and speak to Mr Humbleby and others who hold up these official information requests and say, pull finger, because we deserve to have the information that we ask for. We then raised with the minister the reports that I had and an anonymous letter I'd received about bullying in the health sector. And I have to say that since that issue was raised, and it was raised in the media and picked up by many in the media, I have been inundated with letters and comments of bullying in the health sector, and it has come right from the top. Now, I'm not blaming this minister because he is quite new, but he does follow on from a former minister who was very controlling indeed, who put his fingers into every part of the health system and used threats and phone calls on a regular basis. So the minister said he would be very worrying about bullying in the health sector, but unfortunately he went away and absolutely nothing happened. So that is why we continue to get reports about bullying, particularly at the Ministry of Health and the very highest echelons in health, up with the Director General and his office. We then raised the issue of cost pressures in the district health boards, and we are constantly told by the government that there's more money in health than there's ever been before. Well, Minister, if you put $1 more in than you did last year, there'd be more money than there'd ever been in health before. What it is there sufficient money going into health? And of course, we've never been able to get this answer. We're just told how lucky we are to have the amount of money that we do. Well, we had some work done on this by Infometrics. They are independent, not our figures. They did the work, and they looked at these 6 budgets that the National Party have provided in health, and 4 of those 6 budgets, including this one, have effectively cut the health funding. So we have an accumulative shortfall of $1.7 billion from 2010 to 2015-16. Now, they are not my figures, they are not Labor's figures, they are Infometrics figures using the Treasury figures. They looked at how the change in core Crown Health expenditure aligns with the growth in inflation and demographic characteristics. So we now know that there is a shortfall. So if the minister wants to dispute the figures that Infometrics has provided, put on the table, using the same data that Treasury used, what the real figures are if the minister doesn't agree. I suspect he won't, because it's a terrible embarrassment that $1.7 billion has been removed from the health budget over the last 6 years. We now know that 11 of our 20 DHBs are showing a deficit. And I then questioned the Ministry of Health on the cuts to their budget. They got $74 million, not 79, as it actually says in our report from the Select Committee. And from OIAs and papers released by Treasury, we know that the Ministry asked for $170 million in early funding signal in November last year, and they wanted that to deal with the pressures of both health. They then revised that down to $150 million, according to the figures that we received, and the Minister received advice in February that $74.9 million was necessary to maintain core services in the Ministry of Health. Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Annette King.
Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Health said in February that in regards to the provision of national services by the Ministry, and I want to quote what the Ministry said to the Minister, and look, he probably went in to argue for more for the Ministry, but he was a loser in this respect, because this is what the Ministry said. Easy wins had been exhausted and major service cuts and reconfiguration will be necessary to achieve further major savings. And so, in fact, the Ministry of Health had been asked to reprioritise $32.1 million in savings, and they told the Select Committee the reason that they could now live on $74 million, not the 170 they started with, or the 150 they then asked for and ended up with 74. They said they could now do this because they revised their figures because Treasury's inflation forecasts were lower than what they were predicting. So what did they do? They adjusted the budget down by 50%. Did you know that inflation was running at 50%? Because that is the cut that came in the Ministry of Health budget. So based on wanting $150 million and getting close to 75, because of the adjustment in inflation, which was lower than they expected, we were expected to believe that claptrap. It is just a nonsense. And the Minister, if he was fronting up to this issue, would say his ministry is under huge pressure to be able to provide the core services that they have to provide, let alone the manifesto commitments that have been made to that ministry. But of course, what we got was flannel from his officials as they tried to make sure they looked all right in front of the minister. We didn't get the ungarnished truth about what is happening within the Ministry of Health. Mr. Speaker, we then asked about pharmaceuticals and the money that goes into the Pharmac budget. And we are told that Pharmac got $800 million out of the $15.6 billion budget. It has virtually not moved in 4 years. The same amount of funding has been going into Pharmac, and they're expected each year to make the savings for the government. In fact, they now rely on Pharmac to help them pay for the health budget. Well, we raised at the Select Committee, how long can that go on? How long can we expect Pharmac to take the load for the cuts in the health budget? They deserve a reasonable amount of money to provide pharmaceuticals to New Zealanders in a timely and appropriate way, in a first world way, and we now know there are many drugs in this country that Pharmac can't and will not provide because they can't afford it. So, Minister, that we have real concerns that you're not, in fact, providing sufficient money into the Pharmac budget. They cannot be a cash cow for this government continuously as they have been. So, Mr. Speaker, there were a number of other issues raised in our examination of these estimates. For example, we also raised the issue of social bonds, and the Minister has been questioned on social bonds on a number of occasions. He has been unable to tell this House in questions if the $28.8 million that has been allocated to social bonds will be paid on results, as he said at the beginning, or whether it'll be payment along the way to the banks that are doing the funding. We have not had that answer from the Minister. Perhaps he'd like to take the opportunity in this debate to tell the House, will the $28.8 million of funding be paid once those social bond projects give the results back to the government? Or are they going to have sweeteners along the way out of the $28 million to make them look better, or to even say that they have worked? So either the Minister was telling us it straight when he said it's paid out on results and on outcomes. Well, you can't be paying outcomes out after a few days or a few weeks if you're going to really measure whether mental health patients got a real job and stayed in that job. So there were many things in the Select Committee we raised. I'm glad that the Chair was able to be very positive about everything.
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Mr Chair, look, it is